Spoilers ahead for the Fallout show's first season. My favourite moment in the Fallout TV show comes pretty early on. It's not Lucy's trouble at the organ clinic, or Maximus's run-in with the Yao Guai. It's not even that early shootout in Philly, with the VATS channeling bullet time and the cartoonishly gory flesh explosions in front of the picture-perfect set design. Yes, that scene is hard to beat, and it was the moment I knew this show had nailed the feel and vibe of the source material. It was the highlight for a lot of people, it's great. But my favourite moment is this one, right back in episode 1. The Raider attack on Vault 33, the carnage in the main atrium. In the space of one evening, our protagonist's tranquil underground life is shattered. After some profound nuptial trauma, we watch Lucy enter the pandemonium of the central hall. There's violence, there's gore, it's hard to watch, but it's shot really well. Wedding cake is gobbled, friends are gunned down. And thanks to Vault 33's telesonic projector, all this plays out in front of a convincing facsimile of the pre-war Nebraskan countryside. This is quite the picture, but this scene doesn't just look cool, we see a lot here. We see the brutal, anarchic violence of the wasteland unleashed, a sharp contrast to the ordered world we'd spent the last 20 minutes getting to know. We see a community ostensibly oriented around the goal of civilizing those above, getting a first-hand look at just what that'd take and just how unprepared for it they really are. And so there's even a sort of Oedipal undercurrent here, the revenge of a non-society upon the last vestiges of the society whose complacency and self-interest doomed the surface. At this point in the episode, we've seen that doom. We've seen the bombs fall. We've seen their fire light up the sky, destroy that society. We've seen the end of the world. And then, as the slaughter in the vault picks up speed, as a way of life shatters, as an act of destruction changes everything for this community, we see it again. In amidst all that carnage, a stray spark catches the telesonic projector's film reel and sets it alight. Gradually, and then all at once, the atrium's backdrop shifts from the previous bucolic Nebraskan vista to a sky full of fire. The parallel is hard to miss. That is my favourite moment in the Fallout TV show. Isn't it funny how even down here in the vault, the world can end? Let's take a step back. What is the end of the world? In his 1984 lecture, No Apocalypse Not Now, delivered at the height of the Cold War, of Cold War I, Jacques Derrida famously called the threat of nuclear annihilation a fabulously textual one. The only way we can interact with nuclear war is as a possibility, an imagined thing, is to talk or write about it. Total nuclear war has no precedent, said Derrida, and so the terrifying reality of the nuclear conflict can only be the signified referent, never the real referent, present or past, of a discourse or a text. At least today, apparently. The emphasis on those last words is mine. When people bring this quote of Derrida's up, the spotlight tends to be on that idea of nuclear war as textual, the way that after Hiroshima, words became weapons and weapons became words, the way we all kind of accept this already, even if we don't necessarily realize it. What is deterrence if not persuasion, and what is persuasion if not rhetoric? But let's you and I focus on that last bit. At least today, apparently. Total nuclear war can never be the real referent, can never escape the imagined today in our world, because so far as Derrida is concerned, the thing that sets total nuclear war apart, what takes it from war to apocalypse, isn't the destruction of humanity or the human habitat, but the destruction of what he calls the juridico-literary archive. That is, it runs the risk of obliterating the stockpile of writing and thought we've built up, of obliterating the foundations of the modern world's organizing cultural laws, the foundations that in previous instances of war, sacrifice, or mass casualty would allow the remains of the culture to bear witness to, assimilate, take on those disasters, and continue. By contrast, if the societies of the nuclear epoch were to destroy themselves, even if that destruction was in the name of something, that something's name would be lost in the destruction. Total nuclear war isn't necessarily an apocalypse for Derrida because it'd lead to the human race's extinction or near extinction, or because it'd physically wreck our environment. It's an apocalypse because it's an absolute, irreversible break between our present understanding of existence, based as it is on that cultural archive, and whatever might come next. The war, the after effects, the destruction could never be a referent today. Perhaps it could in some future, but that future would be so separate from our today as to be practically another world. This is why when Derrida is discussing the stakes of nuclear war, he makes reference not to humanity as a whole, but to what is called humanity as a whole. That is, our current idea of existence. Our world. Not the world, our world. And this makes some sense, right? When people more widely, people who aren't philosophers, talk about the end of the world, they're rarely talking about the literal destruction of the planet, or the idea of it simply blinking out of existence. We use the phrase to discuss climate catastrophe. We use it in any number of non-world destroying, non-total extinction fictional contexts. Catastrophic plagues, zombie disasters, alien invasions, and so on. Even, yes, nuclear war. Because even if the bad thing were to happen, even if one of the 3 old men who hold the big red buttons were to slip and fall, millions, billions of us would die? But not everyone, right? Nobody's wasting an ICBM or 10 to make sure every inch of the Amazon, or the Australian outback, or the Mongolian steppe is fully incinerated. The phrase works more literally in some religious contexts, I suppose, your Judgment Day type situations, the idea that someone created the world for a specific purpose and is going to call time at some point, but even then, sometimes the sinners get
left below.
Even then, sometimes the world persists after its end. So, in a lot of cases, the end of the world isn't the end of the world. Maybe it's just the end of a world view. There doesn't even need to be that absolute, irreversible cultural break. Sure, Derrida imagined nuclear war as unprecedented, the absolute new, but that's far from the only way the phantasm of nuclear war has been approached. No, to some, there is little new here, only those 2 familiar elements pushed to their logical extremes. To some, there's an absolute continuity here. Bombs get bigger, collateral damage increases, tactics get more complex, but at its heart, war remains war. And war never changes. There is no clean break in Fallout. Unlike the imagined post-apocalypse conjured by Derrida's lecture, the wasteland is not, and has never been, a blank slate. And the fact that this isn't the case is practically the franchise's basic premise. The world of Fallout is a world where total nuclear war happened, but the cultural archive wasn't destroyed. A world largely defined by that archive's remains. Fallout has changed a fair bit over the years, across different studios and indeed across different mediums, but that basic premise has remained intact. In Fallout, scavengers sing along to 50s doo-wop tracks. In Fallout, ghouls quote old movies as they go in for the kill. Indeed, the show's ghoul character serves as a symbol of that nuclear destruction's non-totality. We see in his survival, his endurance, that the nuclear epoch wasn't annihilated. We see in the way that 200 years later, Coop has become the gunslinging cowboy he once played in the pictures, that the wasteland's inhabitants still define themselves against the relics of an all but lost culture. So, did the world end? Well, yeah, it did. The show tells us this, directly labeling that last pre-war day the end as episode 1 opens. This is only a contradiction if we're viewing Apocalypse as binary, if we're assuming there are only 2 options here, either continuity or clean break. Fallout resists that binary. The remains of that ended world are still visible, are still tangible. For some, it still exists as a memory, but it is over. It is now a settled matter. As with Derrida, then, if Fallout's total nuclear war is the end of the world, it isn't because the world ends. The planet still physically exists. Life does. Human life does. It's because a world ends. Not the world, their world. And with this in mind, this isn't even necessarily the first time this has happened, the first end of the world. Even staying with Fallout's own New World focus, there's no shortage of examples. In 1541, the Spanish explorer Francisco de Orellana sailed the length of the Amazon, writing an early account of the region. In the early 16th century, Orellana's account suggests the landscapes he sailed past were thickly populated. He noted highways and villages as far as the eye could see. But, of course, the arrival of Europeans to the Americas also meant the arrival of European diseases, and so, when the next lot of colonial explorers came to retrace Orellana's steps, they found nearly all of those villages deserted. Some estimates put the number of indigenous Americans killed by Old World diseases as high as 90 to 95%. And oftentimes, those diseases spread faster than the Europeans did, jumping from native peoples who had made contact to those who hadn't. When the Europeans reached the latter themselves, sometimes all they found were bones. An unthinkably deadly smallpox epidemic reached the west of Canada in the 18th century. To quote the headline of an article Tristan Hopper wrote for the National Post, when Europeans first came to British Columbia, they stepped into the aftermath of a Holocaust. As Hopper writes, the, quote, docile and cordial people the explorers met were the shattered survivors of an apocalypse. Looking further back, when Columbus first arrived in Hispaniola, the Taino population was around 300,000. The Spanish promptly imposed a ludicrously high tax on all adult Taino people, which in practice compelled them to work non-stop, under threat of severe reprisals from their newly appointed overseers. In his book The Other Slavery, Andrés Reséndez describes the chilling result of this system of exploitation. Oppressed by the impossible requirement to deliver tributes of gold, the Indians were no longer able to tend their fields or care for their sick children and elderly. They had given up and committed mass suicide to avoid being killed or captured by Christians. It was an extraordinary act of despair and self-destruction, so overwhelming that the Spanish could not comprehend it. Again, at time of Spanish arrival, there were 300,000 native inhabitants of Hispaniola. 12 years later, a census placed the figure at 60,000. 40 years after that, the number was 500. What are stories like this if not stories of apocalypse? The world has ended before. For some, it's ending right now. Worlds end, even if the planet stays physically intact, even if the world doesn't. Apocalypse is relative. And we've always seen that in Fallout, but often kind of from the other side. Fallout is a post-apocalyptic franchise, yes, but it's also post-apocalyptic. At least up until the Bethesda titles, the world got better with every game, and that getting better was kind of the point. And even those more recent installments, criticized as they have been for uprooting the franchise from the progress and civilization of the West Coast and dragging it to a still destroyed East, do tend to orient themselves around the idea of rebuilding, of improving the world. Think Fallout 3's Project Purity, central as it is to the game's story, or Fallout 4's marquee settlement building system. A world ended, but that doesn't mean there can't be another one. This, the spirit of post-apocalypse, of rebuilding, was a central idea, maybe the central idea of the games that built this franchise. But is that the case in the show? The twist of the Fallout TV show, insofar as there is a twist in the Fallout TV show, is that the ruins, the tatters of society that remain, these aren't just pre-war ruins, the remains of LA, of America, before the Great War, all those years ago. They're also the remains of the NCR. The New California Republic, in the lore of the video games, is near enough a modern state that's established itself in the aftermath of the Great War. Yes, it has a bunch of problems, poor leadership, corruption, resource scarcity, it's stretched too thin, overextension isn't just a number in the wasteland, but, you know, a lot of that applies to a whole bunch of countries today. And there's also the rule of law, there's infrastructure. In the show, we see it has libraries, streetcars even. Or had. Because The NCR was destroyed. Shady Sands got nuked, just like LA did before it. And today, 21st century pre-apocalypse ruins blend seamlessly together with the post-apocalyptic ones. Some of those raiders, the ones that attacked Vault 33, slaughtered its dwellers, or at the very least those behind the attack, were from the NCR, the place that was, in living memory, a bastion of civilization, before their world ended too. This twist has proved to be controversial. The fact that the show is canon, and that the reason LA's a wasteland in 2296 is that Civilization got Family Guy Season 2 Episode 3'd once again, has upset more than a few longtime Fallout fans. And I do understand the frustration here. There is a sense in which the modern Fallout franchise's dedication to shades of grey, the way every faction is kinda bad, gives off a kinda cowardly, enlightened centristy, rugged individualism vibe. You know, every belief set's more or less the same, power corrupts, you're better off looking out for number one. Or at least, there's a sense in which the franchise sometimes doesn't do much to resist those sorts of interpretations. And if that is a sore spot, the series' habitual return to the blasted anarchic wasteland setting certainly isn't going to help. Again and again, there is no progress, no values, nothing but radiation, gore, and a rather juvenile sense of morality. Rebuild all you want, the franchise's meta-narrative might seem to have become, nothing's really going to change. Another time skip, another location jump maybe, and we're back to a state of nature. So I understand that the show's decision to bomb Shady Sands, to reset the NCR, the space some gamers have spent real decades and fictional centuries seeing develop and rebuild, the space that's become one of the definitive post-apocalyptic settings, is a galling one to many. But I also understand why this was done. And I think it was necessary. Because this isn't just another Fallout game, is it? It's an adaptation. It's the adaptation. It's millions of people's first encounter with Fallout. For most of them, it'll be their only one. So if the core of Fallout is post-apocalypse, the idea that there's a day after the end of the world, that there's a world after the end of the world, that you can step forward, start to rebuild, as we've done again and again in-game, to be a true Fallout adaptation, the show needs to restage that moment. The moment where a future becomes visible in amidst the rubble. And so, the show needs the rubble. That is a message. That is an idea, one worth exploring, a point worth making for a new audience, and I don't think it's a cowardly one either. It's almost an inspiring one, but it's not a naive one. Because there is a flip side to it, one we see right at the start. If apocalypse is relative, if it's never the end, simply an end, if there is always another world, there's always another end of the world too. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little Fallout video. Who knows, if it does well, maybe I'll come back and hit you with another. There's certainly no shortage of things to talk about with this show. Either way, I'd like to extend a special thanks to my supporters on Patreon and YouTube, the names you're seeing on screen now, and especially Hanan, Daniel Goldhorn, Karen Kuhlman, Magath, Ryan Emily, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Birdie. See you soon.